delighted to have you all here. And when I asked Leslie Stambaugh to help me find somebody, she said, you need to contact Laurie Sanders, because she's absolutely the best. So we're delighted to have you here.
I don't know about that. Thank you. So I'm going to speak from my experience with WICIR, because like a lot of you, WICIR is the Washtenaw Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Rights. You know, just like a lot of you, I mean, I came by this by my detailed understanding of immigration in Washtenaw County through both personal and professional experiences that then I really took with other people into a community organizing activity where we brought together the group, the Washtenaw Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Rights, and we've been responding to increased immigration enforcement in this area since 2008. And my specific knowledge is more with the undocumented Latinx community. Okay, so and that's because it's not, you know, we have responded to nationals, folks who are nationals of African countries, of Slavic countries, of Arab countries, but primarily the undocumented community by and large is the Latino community that comes across our southern border. So that's really where my expertise lies, and I really only like to speak from, you know, my own expertise, my own experiences. So right here in this room, it's clear that we already have a diversity of experiences that we can that can further this conversation. So what I've passed out to you is our model, our Washtenaw Interfaith Coalition for Immigrant Rights model, and I thought that I would just organize this talk for you around how did we come up with these four. You can see it's a diamond model, right? And we have these four pieces to our mission, and we have these have organically in a grassroots way emerged from this first crisis that we responded to in 2008. So I think I'd like to just tell you the story of WICIR, what we've learned so far, what we know now, some of the actions that we've tried to take, and then I'd like to leave some time for you to ask specific questions, because I'm less informed about what you do, and if you're running into cases where you're dealing with people, especially people who may be undocumented, you know, there's specific knowledge that you might want to have. So you might want to be able to ask me some specific questions, okay? But let me tell you a little bit about the birth story of WICIR. So my own experience is that I'm a therapist in Ann Arbor for 30 years. I work with children and families, traumatized folks in particular. I also teach at U of M, School of Social Work, and I'm a social worker, and so I've been an activist really my entire life. I've worked very closely with the LGBTQ community, women's issues, children's rights issues. But I knew very little, honestly, even as a social worker, about undocumented immigration until I met my current partner, Ramiro Martinez, who is from 17 brothers and sisters in Mexico. And that's not unusual since he's from a very large agricultural family and area. And, you know, there are lots of kids in the family, lots of kids to work the farm, right? And he was taken out of school early to work the farm in Mexico. And what had happened is that once I got to know him, I learned that, you know, his family farm business, the family farm really went out of business. And that happened when NAFTA, so we've got to look, we act very locally, but we think very globally. Okay, so we've got to look at the global issue a little bit here. So that's when, you know, Clinton put in the NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and they reduced tariffs on trade, and a lot of big U.S. agribusinesses especially corn and bean, which is the staples of Mexico, the Mexican diet, the tortilla, et cetera, really moved into Mexico and set up these big funded, subsidized agribusinesses and put a lot of the small farming, the farm families out of business, along with a lot of cottage industries, like little candy stores and shoe stores. We also moved, Walmarts and Coca-Cola and big businesses like that into Mexico. So as his story is is really very common, which is that these kids, the farms couldn't sustain. They move into the cities. Guadalajara was his city, to try to get jobs there, but there's not enough jobs there, and that they, for survival purposes, need to come here to the United States in order to make money and send money home in remittances to help out their families, right? And it just makes sense that for survival, young people, right, in their late teens and early 20s, are going to go for where the work is and where the jobs are. And a lot of times people don't realize that immigration doesn't stop at our southern border, right? It's not about so much our border as it is about how does the United States perpetuate these problems in other countries, because we are a very imperialistic country and we like to make deals that are in our best interests, right? But oftentimes when you're making deals with countries that are less developed, then it's those countries and those people that are going to get exploited, right? And so we're seeing a lot of the effects of our involvement in the militaries of these smaller South and Central American countries, the economies of these countries, the drug war, that's going on with the drug trade, the arms trade. So we have we have a big hand, let's just put it that way, in creating or at least exacerbating these problems that create the push then for young people in particular and people who are trying to raise families to come across our border to work. We also have a pull factor here in the United States, which is that we want this cheap labor, right? We need it for our farming, we need it for our service industries, et cetera. So I met Ramiro. He was a sushi chef at Mickey's in 2005, and he was. We joke about the fact that he was kind of at that time Ann Arbor's one and only Mexican sushi chef, because most of the restaurants are owned by Japanese and Korean and Chinese Asian folks with sushi. So, but I got to know him, and he got to know me. We were friends. I would go in and have sushi, and I really, really liked him. And he started to talk to me about his life, and I didn't know that he was undocumented, and I didn't really know what that meant until he told me that. And I told him a lot about my life, and I've had quite an adventuresome life. I've adopted kids. I'm on the LGBTQ spectrum, so I've just, I've had and I'm older than him, so I've had more of a life than he's had. But anyway, so we got to know each other, and after we started to see each other outside of the restaurant, and I started to understand the dire position that he was in and his community is in. Right about 2008, there was a major raid here, immigration raid, in Arbor Meadows mobile home community. And Immigration and Customs Enforcement came in with vans, and they were assisted by local police, by the Pittsfield Township Police in particular. And they went into this mobile home community, and we tried to collect statistics, which is something we've done from the very beginning. We think they took out about 21 undocumented workers. that lived in that mobile home community, which means they split up their families. A lot of times they're taking, so a lot of times folks will be here. There's a husband, and traditionally there's a husband and a spouse, a wife, and children. So oftentimes U.S. citizen children, not always. Some kids have also come across the border. But what they do is they come in and they oftentimes take the man out of the home and detain him for deportation. And what they're hoping there, we've figured out, is that somehow they're going to weaken the family. They're going to disenfranchise the mother. The mother is less likely to speak English, less likely to be involved in the public sphere. She's raising children, right? And that she's going to be weakened, and that she's going to follow the husband back to the home country because she will not be able to survive here. And what we found with our statistics, which I'll talk to you in a minute, is that that's not really what's happening. The children are oftentimes very involved in their communities. The moms are involved. They're integrated into the fabric of their community. They don't have anything to go back to in terms of jobs and economy. And there's a lot of poverty in the rural areas of Mexico. So, and Central America. So that's not really usually what's happening, but that's really what we've identified as a pattern with immigration. So this original raid, they came in, they took out about 21 undocumented workers. There was a woman, there was a family that was having a birthday party for a little 3-year-old, and there was a couple of moms and other little children there. And there was a father and a grandfather, and this family was from Honduras. And immigration came on Palm Sunday. So if you, Palm Sunday, that's very mean to do to the Latino community, because this is, most Latinos, not all, are Catholic, and this is the Holy Week, right? And so they came in that afternoon. They came to this door. They wave a paper, and in order to go into somebody's home, they are supposed to have a warrant signed by a judge. And not once have they had a warrant. Okay, so, but they do wave papers, deportation papers, or papers with people's faces on it, and people don't know what it is and are afraid. They open their door just a little. Immigration pushed their way in to this door. These men stood up. They threw them on the ground and handcuffed them and pulled guns on them in front of these women and children. The women and children ran into the bathroom. The immigration punched a hole in the bathroom door trying to get into these women and children. They ran with their babies. They ransacked the entire mobile home. They took all of everyone's identification that they could find, birth certificates, etc. They went into many other mobile homes that day, took out other folks. They went into a Wendy's and took a woman who had been working there for 8 years, and her spouse had already been deported, and she had a 3-year-old that was staying with a neighbor. And one of the co-founders of WICIR, because this was the co-founding crisis, right, who lived in the mobile home community, Melanie Harner, some of you might know her, wonderful. Immigration came up to her with a 3-year-old child and said, do you want to take this child? They had absolutely no plan for the fact that they were breaking up families. So at the time, Ramiro and I were working on some of the big May Day marches. This is really an anniversary in a lot of ways. There used to be a couple of big May Day marches in Detroit, Los Angeles, and a lot of the bigger cities. And we were working with Margaret Horner, who is, she's retired now, but she was an advocate at the Student Advocacy Center, and her daughter Melanie, who is adopted from Colombia, and she was involved at the time with a man who was undocumented, and so was I. So Ramiro was undocumented at the time. So Melanie called her mother when that raid happened and said, this is happening, and Margaret called me. And I called Ramiro, and the four of us decided we've got to do something now about this. This is a crisis. And so we called a good old-fashioned, just good old-fashioned community organizing. We called everybody that we knew, right? And I called all the activists that I knew, and the child welfare folks, and the LGBTQ folks, and the Quakers, because I had spent a good time in Quaker meeting. And Margaret, they have a very active progressive church, the first Congregational United Church of Christ, right, in Ypsilanti. It's a small congregation, but very active. She called everyone she knew. She called all her advocates. I called all the academics and the peace and justice people. And Ramiro went out into his community. He had organized big soccer games of the many guys that are here without a lot to do other than work their tails off. And he went out into his community and talked to people about coming. And we had an emergency meeting within the first day. Like 24 hours later, we had an emergency meeting at the church, and we had at least 50 people there, and we had about 35 different organizations represented. And we did this meeting bilingually because we also had undocumented immigrants there who were very brave to actually come, Spanish speaking. And we listened to the story. We had the woman, so they had taken the men. The men that they threw on the ground, they took them, they detained them, they left the women. And the young mom from Honduras that we called Janet was there, and she had her 1-year-old baby and her 3-year-old baby. And they were shocked, these children. I'm skilled in forensic interviewing of young children and assessment of young children, and they were definitely shocked and dissociated. She was crying. She told her story. We asked some folks from Detroit to come, some Latino folks, because most of us were allies, or people who wanted to be good allies. But as you know, probably, allies can make mistakes, right? We can out of doing something that we think is good, we can cause more problems sometimes. So we called consultants to come that day, and we collected money to try to get these men out on bond. What we decided to do with Janet, we put Janet in the center of this circle, of this decision-making circle, and she was scared to death and wanted to go with her husband if they deported her, which is unusual, but we were eventually able to arrange that. But we couldn't find, we went down, we organized a whole delegation to go down to ICE, there was about 6 of us, and complain about this and meet with the director and try to get these guys out. And we couldn't get them out. In fact, they disappeared them into the system. I mean, it was just a nightmare, right? And I thought that, our government would be more reconciling, or, and I'm a white woman that moves with a lot of privilege in the world. I know people of color, my children, my spouse, other people of color, suspect, are treated differently and suspect that the government's not going to be helpful to them. But I was shocked at the brutality, honestly, of the way in which they went about this. So at the time, there was a Univision satellite. Univision is the biggest Spanish-speaking news in the world, right? There was a satellite. Jorge came, and he was a news reporter, and he interviewed Janet in her mobile home, and we sent witnesses to support her, and I was one of those witnesses, and so was my spouse, who's now my spouse, Ramiro. And I saw the blood on the floor. I saw the hole in the bathroom door. The little baby, the little 3-year-old said in Spanish, "The police killed my daddy," which is how she perceived it, and we, of course, reassured her that that wasn't the case, but very, very traumatizing. That all happened during Holy Week, and Saturday, the night before Easter, we had another emergency meeting. We sent everybody back into their organizations to bring more people, and we had about 150 people at that second meeting, and that's where we broke out, and we asked the immigrant community, the undocumented people that were there, we asked them what they needed first. So one of the things that's always been important to us is to make sure that, you see this little circle in here, to make sure that undocumented people, that's our leadership table, okay? And we're kind of a steering committee, and we actually use restorative justice decision-making, trying to reach consensus, but kind of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 agreement on issues. But it's been very important to us to have the undocumented community be at that table in the center, making the decisions, and we elevate the voices of those people who are undocumented so that we make sure that we're meeting their needs. So the first thing they said that they wanted was a phone that they could call if they were facing immigration at their door, if they were facing threats and questions about immigration. So for the first 4 years, that was my cell phone. And I'll tell you, that's not sustainable. So one of the big successes of this organization is shifting it to become sustainable, which is no easy task. But Ramiro actually took the calls because he's the best Spanish speaker, and I'm the social worker. So I had him interpreting all the calls, but we would get calls in the middle of the night. ICE likes to come in the wee hours of the morning when people are still sleeping, caught off guard, bust into homes, take people, tell the women that they're coming back for them, that they better leave because they're coming back for them, and scare them. And so we started this urgent response phone with a small group of volunteers, okay? And so one of the things we've done from the beginning is we've documented every call, which I think is unusual for an all-volunteer organization. But what we know now, and remember, this is tip of the iceberg, because these are voluntary calls, right? People don't have to report to us, but when they call us, we make sure we document. So we've taken over 1,000 calls, and half of those calls are like questions about immigration, needing an immigration attorney, needing resources, and the other half are all calls of where at least one person has been detained or deported. And many of them involve multiple people because we've dealt with neighborhood raids, like this one that I'm describing to you. We've dealt with workplace raids, like going into Wendy's and going into IHOP and Chili's. We've had a number, and Mr. Roof. I mean, we've had a number of workplace raids where they take multiple people at a time. There's transit raids. And there's targeted individual raids. So we've, about half of those cases involve the detainment or deportation of at least one adult. And we know that hundreds of children in our community alone have lost primary parent, and thousands of children, hundreds, if not well over 1,000 children have lost a primary parent, and thousands of children have lost supporting adults, because the Latinx community is a very, very collective community and help each other out, and uncles and aunties take care of kids and help fund, help supply resources. So that's the situation right now. We don't know how many people exactly have been detained or deported, but we know from our statistics that we've hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of people. And that's over the last 10 years. So you probably know this, but we have to look at, again, at the bigger picture, which is that we've always had undocumented migration across the southern border. First of all, our southern border is the largest land border in the world between a developed country and a less developed country. And whenever you have that, you're going to have people seeking support and resources, right? And before 9/11, people were coming here. We didn't care very much. We kind of turned another cheek to it. People came here. Then there was a lot of what we would call transmigration, like coming, getting a job, buying a truck, taking the truck back home to Mexico so that the family has a truck, right? Or coming here, making some money, going back and starting to build a home in Mexico. But with 9/11, came the Department of Homeland Security. There was a lot of stress. There was a lot of, their mission was to safeguard the country and to control for terrorists, right? But, and there's no evidence that any terrorists have come across our southern border, but what really ended up happening is that we put a lot of money into the Department of Homeland Security, Border Patrol. The Border Patrol people are folks that are coming back. It's a paramilitary organization. They're coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan war. They need jobs. And so we've really scapegoated the undocumented Latinx community that had been coming here. So we lock down the border, but we don't lock down trade. We don't lock down labor, the need for labor, right? So we've made it very difficult for people to come. And we've also, the strategy of the government is to put the squeeze on the people that are here. So, for example, until 5 years ago, you could have a driver's license. You didn't have to have a social security number in order to have a driver's license, so people were legally driving. Well, with the Real ID Act came the linking of the social security number with the driver's license, and so now people are driving because they have to drive their kids around and they've got to get to work with expired licenses. So one of the things that we could tell from our statistics was that 30% of the people that were being detained started with a local traffic stop because people did not have a valid driver's license. And then they would be sent to court. They're driving on an invalid driver's license. They would be sent to court, but and the court would say, go get a valid driver's license. They have no way to do that, so they would avoid going to court. Then they would have a warrant out for their arrest, right? Another thing that the government did is created these operational technical systems where once a person is brought into the Washtenaw County Jail, if they can't identify them, they don't have a photo ID, they can't identify them, they'll bring them into the jail, they take their fingerprints, the fingerprints are sent through a national database, and they're flagged for immigration, right? And immigration is supposed to come and pick them up from the county jail within 2 days. So this was how a lot of people in our community were being arrested, is through this local traffic stop problem. So
I just
yeah.
So today the march is all about getting licensed.
Yes, it is. It's all about trying to change that, and there are cities that have changed that, especially in California. I think Chicago have worked on that. So there is a way to do that. And then we also, I'll get down to political action in a minute, but let me go back to this, because what the people told us that they wanted was this urgent response line. So that's our primary mission. We also have a teen group. So the parents started to tell us that their teenagers, their children were suffering from depression, suffering from fear. People were staying in their homes, afraid to come out. The children were witnessing their parents be deported. They didn't know how to distinguish. They were getting very, very scared of police. They didn't know how to distinguish ICE from an Ann Arbor cop, from a sheriff, from local police. So we started a teen group, and that's our only paid position. We have a social worker that's trauma informed that works with that group, because the stories, the wounds that these kids have experienced are really intense. The other thing they said they wanted was education. They wanted to know what their rights were. For example, you don't have to open your door to anyone unless they show you a warrant signed by a judge, right? And we show the community what that looks like. You don't have to answer questions. You can incriminate yourself by answering questions like, where are you from? Do you have documents, right? So there are certain rights we all have constitutionally, regardless of whether we're citizens. Of course, there's a lot of controversy about that. Like, you have the right to remain silent. You have the right to not open your door. You have the right to make a phone call. You have the right not to sign documents that you don't understand when you're in jail. But the community didn't know they had these rights, and also we never tell somebody, oh, you should exercise this right, because we know that when people who are in vulnerable and marginalized situations do exercise their rights, oftentimes they're treated they're treated very badly. And no one has been legally arrested. If you look at like how people are supposed to be arrested in this country, no one has been legally arrested that has been arrested. However, when they can show that the person is undocumented, our Patriot Act, I don't really understand all the details of this, but the Patriot Act allowed intense discretion on the part of the federal government. So once they can show that a person is undocumented, then that trumps, excuse the pun, that trumps the fact that they were not legally arrested. And so the ACLU has tried to work on this, but it's very, very hard to get people's rights in retrospect. Okay, so we do know your rights education in the community, and then we do this kind of education. We call it ally education, where we're mostly talking to people who are mostly documented or citizens, and we try to dispel the myths about immigrants and immigration and undocumented immigration, and just try to build a base, right? So that as this horribly divisive issue now takes center stage in our political climate, our political world, that we have a base of people who understand and have compassion. The other thing that we do is political actions, okay? So, for example, when we realized that 30% of the people that were getting detained were starting out at the Washtenaw County Jail, we knew that our sheriff wouldn't like that, because he's a pretty good guy. Sheriff Clayton did his dissertation on anti-racial profiling, etc. But we had to convince him that his deputies were asking about immigration status, that the undocumented community really was at risk here in Washtenaw County, and so we started bringing cases to his attention. So one of the things that we've done is every time we have a case where it may look like it's racial profiling has happened, or where there's some kind of policy that like, for example, we've gotten a lot of ordinances passed in Ann Arbor and in Ypsilanti, ordinances to support the undocumented community, ordinances to keep the police out of the business of immigration enforcement. And when we find one of those, or when we suspect that one of those has been violated, we go directly to the chief of police. So we have had many meetings with Sheriff Clayton. We've had many meetings with the Ann Arbor Police and the Ypsilanti Police, and we have talked to Chelsea Police, and we've talked to Milan Police. So whenever we have the opportunity through our cases, people who call us, to interact with the police, we do that. And one of the successes that we've had is that Sheriff Clayton created some internal policies to make sure that his deputies were not asking about immigration enforcement. And so we really have been able to raise the consciousness of police. We're not all the way there yet. There's a lot of police that believe that ICE and Border Patrol are reputable law enforcement agencies. We do not feel that way. So we are kind of constantly talk about dispute, right? We're constantly in negotiations and dispute resolutions with the police, but we have a pretty good relationship with them now after 10 years of interfacing. So we call that a political action. That's what I mean by acting very locally, but having a global perspective, right? The other thing was getting involved in the Washtenaw County ID project. And this is something that if you want to do a little activism, you can do this right now if you don't have one already. So Synod, which is a organization that helps people with, you can pass that around, with homelessness and mental illness. Keita Cohen from Synod approached us at WICIR and said, I'm finding a whole bunch of people don't have photo IDs and addresses and are being shut out now that we're ID crazy, right? Being shut out of health appointments and being able to get medicine and things like that. So we decided that it was important, and the undocumented folks, of course, they can't get a state ID either. It's not just about driving. It's like you can't get a state ID without a social security number. So it took us almost 3 years, but we organized in Washtenaw County to get a county ID, a county photo ID. And you can get this county photo ID, and Sheriff Clayton was on our task force so that it would be seen by police as valid. We have 2 banks now, or one or two banks that will see it as valid. Can imagine not having an ID and trying to get a bank account, right?
Well, they couldn't get their children from school and things
Exactly, exactly. So, so now you can go down to the county clerk's office, get this ID. It costs $25. There's a huge number of eligibility ways of being eligible for this ID, and so that it will cover people who maybe don't have a birth certificate but have some other proof of address or whatever. And there's advocates there at the county building that will help people figure out what documents they need and can help them access documents in order to get this ID.
So is it 220 North Main? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we don't want this ID. We would really love for allies, right, to get this ID so that and then use it. So that every time a person pulls out this ID, they're not suspected of being an undocumented immigrant or a homeless person or a person who's, whose only proof of identification would be this ID. And you can also give extra money if you want to help somebody purchase an ID. So when you go, you can pay $25. If you pay $50, it's a scholarship for someone else, okay? So I highly recommend, and it's really interesting to use it. I use it all the time. They're like, what's that? I'm like, oh, you don't know about the Washtenaw County ID? Well, you ought to know about it. And the thing is that we're the only county in the entire nation who's done this. There's cities, San Francisco has done it, New York has done it, and Detroit has done it, but we're the only county so far. So this is an example of a political action. Another is that we've really worked to stop some deportations. There's been, like Lourdes, a lot of people know Lourdes Salazar Bautista, who's a mom of 3 kids here. We stopped her door. She was the center of her campaign. We did vigils, we did phone marathons, we did petitions, everything, national campaign to stop her deportation, and we were able to stop it for 5 years until Trump came in and they deported her last summer. And there's a documentary that is beautiful, made by Tony Collins. It's very educational, called Lourdes. And you can access that probably through YouTube at this point.
What is it called?
It's called Lourdes. Lourdes, her name, yeah. But we worked very closely with her to stop her deportation. And then, of course, we're very involved with the sanctuary movement that Joanne and Lori have talked about. We helped to get tuition equality for undocumented students, students who have DACA. So DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Children who had come, and you've heard a lot about these kids. So Obama didn't act very quickly on national comprehensive immigration reform, which is disappointing. But he tried to put in some executive orders there at the end. He got DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, kids who arrived under the age of 15, who came with parents who had no choice about coming across the border, who have been in American schools. But the eligibility is tight. They have to not have criminal records, and it's still very tight. But for those kids that have been living in, like our friend Javier, who came when he was 4, and he was the homecoming king at Skyline, and accepted to U of M for engineering, and was still going to have to pay out-of-state tuition, even though he lived here his whole life, right? So we got that passed at U of M, at Washtenaw County, and at Community College, and Ypsilanti, we just work on a lot of things that are going to make it a little bit easier to be here. And we're up against this huge. We're up against this huge thrust to make it as difficult as possible for immigrants to live here. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's happened with on the political scene, what's happened with Trump and Obama. So Obama had these priorities put into place, and they weren't executive orders, but they were priorities that were put out in a memo to ICE that basically said, look, there's category 1, 2, and 3 priorities for deportation. Category 1 are people who have committed serious felonies, serious crimes, right? Need to be deported. Category 2, a lot of people who have misdemeanors, or so if you get caught if you're driving for 10 years here and you get 2 traffic tickets, and you don't have an ID, and that keeps coming up, you're very likely to end up with 2 or 3 misdemeanors. Many of the people that they are calling criminals, as they say we are deporting the criminals, are people with 2 or 3 misdemeanors. The other thing is that the other group they're calling criminals and are on their stats, because if you look at their stats, Border Patrol and ICE, you'll see that they have a high number that they're calling criminals. Well, these are people that are getting felony convictions for re-entering the country. So let's say you're a dad, you've got 3 kids here and a spouse, and you get deported, and you can't make any money in Mexico. Boom, you come back over and hope not to be detected, right? You're caught, now you're a felon, and you're going to be put in prison for a good number of months and then deported. So these are the people they're calling criminals, okay? So, but what Obama said is priority 3, which is very low priority. Anybody who has been here for 10 years, who has American citizen children, who has hardship, they're taking care of someone who has no criminal history, right, should not be a priority for deportation. Well, when Trump came in, the first thing he did was wiped out those priorities, okay? So now Immigration and Customs Enforcement has free reign, and they actually act like, I know I might sound biased, but I've been watching this for 10 years now, or 11 years now. I mean, they act like rogue, rogue, I don't know how to say it, out of control.
Paramilitary.
Military, yeah. Paramilitary, rogue.
Like Gestapo.
Gestapo, exactly. They're very, very, and so those priorities are wiped out. That's why Lourdes got deported. And I think that ICE in Detroit, that is run by Rebecca Ducci, she's been the director there for a long time. I think she was trying to show us, because we had gotten her to stop Lourdes' deportation by complaining, for 5 years, right? Every year she had to go up for a stay of deportation with her immigration lawyer. I think that Rebecca Ducci was basically showing us that, look, now everybody can be deported. So that's why we get involved in these kind of political campaigns. I'm going to leave a lot of time for questions, but I want to just talk about one more thing, which is community organization and engagement. So, as I said, we go by the principle, if you're not at the table, you might be on the menu, right? So we always want undocumented folks at our central table, and that's easy to say and harder to do because the community is very busy. People are working. Didn't come here to get politically involved. So we have a good number of young DACA folks that are very involved in our organization. We now have with this leadership team of about 9 folks, and then we have a very robust volunteer circle on the outside of that. So we've got somebody who carries the phone for 3 weeks at a time, trades it off to someone else, a Spanish speaker. And when they take the phone, we've got a streamline. When they take the phone and they have a problem, they have an issue, then they've got a team of like 3 or 4 people to help them figure out what to do. And so, and that has really changed a lot. And so we're constantly looking for volunteers. We only operate on donations. We're an all-volunteer organization, but any money that comes to our organization is given directly to the undocumented community, usually to help pay for a lawyer who will jump into a detention center and at least assess whether the person has any reliefs. Oftentimes it's for groceries for a mom whose spouse has just been taken, or we just try to get in there and meet the needs as much as possible. We try to take the stress off as much as possible of this experience. When people call, we either counsel them on the phone. Oftentimes we have what we consider a clearness meeting, where a group of volunteers who are trained will get together with that family. They can come, they can bring anybody in their family to the meeting, and they can tell their story, and we listen. We listen, and encourage them to tell us what happened, and then help them prioritize their needs. And then if we can meet those needs, we do. Sometimes we can't, but that's really the way that we roll. So I have a lot more information about immigration, but I'd like to open it up to questions. Yeah.
So my driver's license recently needs to be renewed, and they were talking about real ID, and I decided it was just a way to know whether you were a citizen or not. So I deliberately did not apply for real ID, which means, to me, it means I have to carry my passport when I fly.
Right.
But I was making a statement. Is it doing any good, or should people do that, or does it make any difference? Or?
That's a really good question. I think it's a noble action, right? I don't know if it's going to make a difference.
I mean, is that something that you would recommend or try to tell people to do that? I mean, you were telling us to get the Washtenaw ID.
Right.
And I guess it really doesn't matter for driver's licenses, because we already wouldn't give them driver's license before the real ID came out, I think. So.
Right. Not giving people driver's license is a part of the real ID, but the real ID is bigger. Yeah, it involves the.
That's something you hadn't really thought about.
Not recommending that people don't get the real ID. I protested when the state, because I work for the university and I had a contract with the state to see children, wanted us to get involved, wanted us to become a part of E-Verify. You're familiar with E-Verify? Is this system now where they put in people's social security numbers, employment, and if your social security doesn't match match up, then you can't be employed, right? And E-Verify is something that the Trump administration wants to see happen everywhere. But I had to do it, or else I wouldn't have been able to work at the university. So, but I sent in a nasty letter with it. This is just about entrapping undocumented people. And actually, we had a case, a man from an African country had tried to get a job at a temp agency, and and his social security number didn't match up, and the temp agency ran his social security through E-Verify. The temp agency then, I guess what happened is once it was run through E-Verify and it's mismatched, it's sent to immigration. He gets a letter at his address, because he had given his address, that from immigration telling him to report to the Department of Homeland Security within the next 8 days. So he called us and he was like, what should I do? And we don't give, we help people figure out we kind of help people figure out what their options are, probably very similarly to what you do, but we don't give advice. But he said, should I move? And we're like, sounds like a good idea. So he moved so that he could avoid being detected by ICE. So that's really evidence that this is an entrapment program more than anything else. So, yes?
I'm not really familiar with what it takes to get legally, to legally immigrate from Mexico. Could you address that at all?
Yeah, so, and this is one of the things that Trump really wants to change. I mean, he really wants to change legal immigration. Okay, so he wants to change, our system is a family system. It's called chain migration, which, well, they're calling it chain migration. But it's basically that you can, if you can bring primary family members here if you are a U.S. citizen. Okay, and so this is what happened to my spouse. His father was a bracero worker. Okay, well, as a bracero worker, it was a guest worker that came in the Reagan years, and they gave amnesty to those, quote, amnesty to those bracero workers. So he got his green card when he came here as a worker. He worked in the potato fields in the 80s. And he went back and he got a green card. He was able to get a green card for his spouse and the youngest children. Okay, so anybody under 18, with his green card, he was able to get a green card for them. The other children, the children who were adult children, he could apply for a visa for them. So he did that. So my spouse, at 19, he was an adult child, not a minor. He was approved, he had a visa approved to come here to the United States. But now he's 42, okay. This was in 1995. He waited 5 years, no visas available. He came across the border in 99, I think, was caught 3 times in 1 week. But at that time, they weren't keeping, this was pre-9/11, so they were keeping the same kind of records they are now. But he would still be waiting. His sisters and brothers just got their notification that a visa might be available for them 25 years later. Yeah, that's how broken the system is. It really, when people say it's broken, it really is. There is no way to come here legally unless you're a rocket scientist and somebody wants you for a job, or you are a direct family member. You are sponsored by somebody who's a fiance or a direct family member. Now, it's also a myth that you can just marry. So I married my spouse so that, I love him, but it's not an immigration marriage. But but I didn't need to be married. I've been married before, not legally, but to a female partner, and I don't love the institution of marriage, but I was happy to marry him because he needed to be legal here. And what happened is that, you can't just marry an undocumented person and get them, because what happens is they have to go back to their home country to interview. And if they are found to have met you here, then they came across the border undocumented, then they get barred from coming back in. Now, the only reason that we could interview here, we interviewed in Detroit, was because he already had an approved petition that he had been waiting for then for 20 years. So he had an approved petition, and they allowed us to interview in Detroit, which is the only that. And he was very lucky. So his friends, he's lucky. He got his green card, and in 5 years got his citizenship. He just got his citizenship like summer before last. But all of his friends are undocumented. They're all from his hometown here. They have been here for many years with U.S. citizen children. They have no way of becoming legal here. So that's why the law really needs to change, so that there is some legal there's a pathway at least for people to become citizens. But so what Trump wants to do, I'll get to you in just a second, what Trump wants to do is he wants to end chain migration. He wants to end what he's calling chain migration, the family system, and he wants it to be on merit. He wants a merit system. So you have to be able to speak English. You have to be educated. You have to have skills. You cannot be a low-skilled laborer. Okay? He wants to shift the whole thing so that people cannot bring, and he's already doing it. If you look at, he's already chopped down who can, what types of family members. Can you bring cousins? Can you bring aunts and uncles? Right? He's already, which you can't, but I mean, he's already chopped down the number of people that can actually be brought here.
And what about, is there a temporary program or any kind? I mean, we have a lot of jobs for.
There's a temporary H-1 visa for people to bring people mostly to work in the fields, seasonal workers, but they have to go back. So they can't, there's no, if they stay past their visa, they're here undocumented. So there's no way to become embedded in your community. There's no way to become a member, a part of your society, of the society. Yeah, wow, we got a lot of questions. Ruth.
So it's mostly economic immigration from Mexico. Are there any folks who come as refugees?
There's people who are trying to seek asylum at the border, right? And there's all sorts of chaos there.
Is that much of a population here in Washtenaw County, or are
a refugee population?
Yeah.
Or are you talking about the folks who are coming from Honduras?
Refugee kind of
Okay,
folks
so
here versus economically.
Yeah. So there's no such thing as an economic refugee,
Right.
unfortunately.
Right.
There should be, especially since we're creating a lot of the crappy economy down there. But the thing is that in order to be a refugee, you've got to show that your life is, and an asylum seeker, you got to show that you are in danger, and that it's not just you have a dangerous community. It's that you're targeted. You're personally at danger by somebody that you can point to. It can't be that your community is gang infested, unfortunately. So what's happening is a lot of, just a second, Lori, you probably have more information on this than I do, but and I might have misinformation too. I hope I don't, but what's happening is that folks are coming to the border and they're claiming they're seeking asylum, but the way this family separation policy came in is that Trump was arresting everyone who came to the border undocumented, prosecuting adults, and you can't prosecute a child, so that was their excuse for separating children, right? They're now detaining asylum seekers. Okay, people come to the border and say, I want asylum. They're detaining them until or they're planning to, until their court date, which can be a very long time. So there's all sorts of, and then that's like criminalizing asylum seekers, right? So people are coming to the border claiming that their lives are in danger, and they really are, because of the deterioration of their communities and the gang infestation, the violence in their communities. But it's not necessarily a political persecution that they're experiencing according to our standards.
So there's not much of that in Washtenaw County?
Well, we have, what's happened, I'll tell you what's happened is that some of these asylum seekers have been arrested, moms in particular, brought up here to Battle Creek, which is, okay, so what's happening is there's not enough detainment down there for everybody, so they're sending them all over the country, and now they're being released up here with no connections anywhere. Okay, so no family here, no support, no lawyer, no, and so I think that if Sanctuary can do anything, the Sanctuary movement, it would be to support those women. And so yes, there are those folks from the border, and we've had kids put in foster care up here. There's several agencies that have a contract with Department of Human Services, Homeland Security, and Department of the combination of Homeland Security and the Department of Human Services to house those separated children up here. And I'm a social worker, and to me, I feel like social workers that are involved in carrying out that policy are messing with our ethics. Yeah. So, Lori, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say there was an NPR story yesterday that the Trump administration is moving that asylum seekers be charged a fee for an application fee, which is all the other fees at this point are multiple hundreds of dollars.
Right.
And so that's sort of one more
Right.
impediment.
I heard that too, and they're supposed to come up with that through the dangerous tread.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
people who've left,
Yeah.
left everything. They
Yeah.
got
Lots of money
et cetera.
left.
It puts them at an incredible risk of kidnapping and of abuses along the way. That's a very treacherous path.
Sure, and I was going to, I shouldn't assume, but I would say probably this group has been following the stories that there are big camps of children at the border that are being, essentially concentration camps for kids that are being held. And a lot of credible sexual abuse allegations of children who are in those camps as well. I mean, it's created just this horrible situation, with a legacy of, so heartbreaking, so unnecessary.
Yeah. So it seems, Joanne.
No, I was just going to say that because you were talking about the emphasis on what the undocumented want, and I hate to call them undocumented. I call them, I don't even, but anyway, so the COSETRA group that's demonstrating for licenses today in Detroit is totally undocumented oriented, and this is what they thought of. This is what they wanted.
Their needs.
And they wanted to show people what a day without undocumented immigrants would be like, And but I think, however, these are horrible stories of people who try to get into U.S. Even though we need them, we reject them. But there are immigrants that get in very easily, who are coveted, who are headhunted, by Ford, by General Motors, and they get flush wages, and within a year or two they get their green cards, and it's a different story. If you are high tech,
that's the merit. That's the merit.
But I mean, the merit base is really
it's super classist and very, very elitist. Yeah.
Exactly. So. But then again, for example, I was just with a group of Sudanese last week,
Mm-hmm.
and they were unprofessional people, and I said, how did you get in here? But they weren't like high-tech professional, just middle-level professional. They said, oh, we just went to the embassy and got our green card, you know. It was nothing for them. And I'm like, we just have this, well, as you said, incredibly broken system.
Yeah, and
And you can't understand it.
we've
That's
scapegoated. So a lot of people feel like it's just a big, overall, if you think very globally, racist agenda that Trump doesn't want more brown people in the country making decisions, voting, etc. Right?
But the people from Sudan were brown, black,
Yeah,
in fact.
yeah, yeah. Yes.
So my question was that I was just curious that in that story that you mentioned that they went and they got the father. What happens to the kids? Do they just still remain illegal, or because if they were born in here?
If they were born here, they're citizens. So the children are citizens, and they have rights in this country. They have right to education. They have right to health insurance. They have rights, right? And so this is partially why families are not going back. I mean, their children are not going to be better off in these countries, especially where there's so much violence. Right, and so what's happening is that when the parents are deported, like with Lourdes' children, her teenager who was still in high school went to Mexico, but then came back here and is living with an uncle. And Pamela, her daughter, her eldest daughter, is at Michigan State, but her mom is not here. So you can only imagine how heartbreaking that is for them and how difficult it is. So when it's happened that a lot of times U.S. citizen children are staying here with relatives and friends when their parents are deported. And then I think immigration figured now everybody's at risk, but for a while there with Obama, they were taking the man and they didn't want to deal with the children. They realized if they took both the man and the woman, who are both undocumented, that they would have to put the children in foster care, right? Which would not look good. And also there's already like 5,100 children in foster care that have something to do with immigration, okay, where there's a combination of immigration. So they just left the moms and threatened them. They did this for years, like just left the moms and said, we're coming after you next. So they would, like, we put one mom, example of an urgent response, one mom, they did that to, a mom from Colombia with a 17-year-old and a 10-year-old, and she couldn't even think. She was so scared. And she was in this trailer, this mobile home where they had come and taken her spouse. And so we put her in a hotel. She wanted to get rid of her trailer, and that's hard to do, right? And so we put her in a hotel for about a month so that she could figure out what she wanted to do. We call it safe haven. Now we're calling it sanctuary. But we so that she could think and she could try to prioritize and figure out what she wanted to do. And she eventually stayed here. She got an apartment, but mostly people are staying because their children have rights here.
And then the ones that they are U.S. born, they are just become put in the foster care. And what if they are not born and then they came?
If they're undocumented kids, that means that they can also, they can't be deported. They can be put in refugee foster care and deported at 18. Or they can be taken back to their country with their parent. Sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
I think it's so ironic that Melania's parents got citizenship through the chain thing.
It was Melania had so much talent that was needed in this country.
Well, nothing against Melania, and her parents should have done that. That's not a problem.
Right.
But
It's just so ironic. I don't understand the ethics that allow.
There are no ethics.
I remember thinking about him as hard to understand. He's crazy.
But what I'm worried about is that now with the policy of penalizing the Central American countries that allow their people to come to the border and reducing the limited funds they already have. Instead of sending people out there with, lots of technical know-how, money, whatever,
Right.
just improving conditions.
Right.
We're just going to make them worse and more people.
And we
will
have
come.
no committees that are looking at the root causes of the immigration problem, right? How have we facilitated helped these countries to get into the conditions that they're in?
We are primarily responsible.
Yes. So, yes.
I just want to say something quickly about that is, this group of people has a set of skills that they can insert themselves, the mediation skills and the restorative skills and all the conflict resolution skills are there, to help people reach resolution and get down to the root of the issue. So how can these people get involved in those decision-making, places?
Yeah.
What do we do to get ourselves there and take our skills to where they're needed for issues like this?
Well, I think to get involved in, you can definitely volunteer with WICIR. You can get involved in any of these organizations. But I think that I don't know all of what you do, but I think what's really important is to know that if you're working with an undocumented family or person, that they're vulnerable and they're at risk, and that you should keep that information confidential. Like, it's kind of a little bit, there's kind of a don't ask, don't tell, right? But you do, if you're working with people and like, just as a therapist, I need to ask, because I need to make sure that I'm not recommending something that is going to put that person at risk. Like, you might not, like, we don't recommend that undocumented people go into a jail and visit their partner in jail, right? We know that they can't get housing, they can't get a housing voucher. A mom who doesn't have a social security number cannot get a housing voucher. She can get Medicaid for her kid, she can get food stamps, but she cannot get a housing voucher, right? There's certain things, they're going to be afraid to go to the doctor. So there's a lot of health issues because people don't go to regular doctor's appointments, right? Anywhere that they have to show an ID is going to be possibly an area of, and people aren't going to say, oh, I'm not going to do that because I don't have papers, right? So you've got to find, you probably have skills in being able to ask sensitive questions. And usually when I ask somebody, talk to me, please tell me about your immigration status, I usually tell them why I'm asking. And I usually say, this is confidential, it will go nowhere, this information will go nowhere other than me, but it's going to help me to know better how to help you. So if you could talk with me about your immigration status, I would appreciate that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but there's this special community, right? There's special sensitivity I think you need. Yep.
Also today, any money that you donate is going to go to WICIR, not to the DRC today. So
great. And I have to go. I got my little guy in the car. So.
That's right.
Yeah,
Your
my little therapy dog is in the car. He couldn't come in here. So
he wasn't allowed in.
He wasn't allowed in.
An immigrant.
Well. He's okay. At least it wasn't a hot day out there.
Right.
Yeah, that one I wouldn't have known what to do.
Thank you so
You're
much, Laura,
welcome.
for speaking to us and also for all you do in the community.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.